Last Monday I published my impressions video of Assassin's Creed Valhalla because I hadn't finished it after 30 to 40 hours. Now, double that amount of time later, I have finally finished the damn thing. However, before we begin, I'd like to say that I am well aware that because I've been playing the game for review, that has influenced my opinion on it being too long, and I'm sure many of you will really enjoy it because there's a lot you can sink your teeth into and you can spread out your time. In that last video, I called Valhalla the best Assassin's Creed game in years, and while I do stand by that, my opinion has dropped faster than my pants on my anniversary. I still definitely do like it, but not as much as I did in those first few hours. See, this is why we wait until we finish games to review them, kids. Where you stand on this game will greatly depend on your specific position on all the other Assassin's Creed titles, and since everyone has a completely different opinion about each one, that might be a bit tricky. Many will love it and announce it as their absolute favourite entry to the franchise, but many will absolutely hate it. The last two I played were Syndicate and Odyssey, the latter of which I couldn't even finish because I was so bored, and I like this one much more than both of them. If you already like Assassin's Creed, you'll probably enjoy this one too, but if you don't like Assassin's Creed and don't like Ubisoft games in general, this one isn't going to convince you otherwise. There are a few changes to make the game seem less Ubisoft-y, which are certainly welcome, but at its core, it's still very much a Ubisoft-style game. So, as a quick recap of what Assassin's Creed is for those of you who might be looking at Valhalla from the outside, there is a secret war that has been going on for centuries between assassins who fight for freedom and Templars who want control. Using some fancy sci-fi mumbo-jumbo in a machine called the Animus, you assume control of a character in the present day and live out the memories of their ancestors through various historical time periods. These ancestors have usually come into contact with artifacts of an ancient civilization that died millennia ago but still influences the world today. But for the past few entries, including this one, that real-world story has taken a back seat to historical shenanigans, so don't worry about that if this is your first time. All you really need to know is that you're an assassin in a specific period of history, and it's your job to kill all the Templars on top of any character-specific stories. To set the stage for my own personal opinions and biases, I've played most of the games in the series and much prefer the days of Ezio to anything else, and I really didn't like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. To me, I felt this entry was an improvement on Odyssey in virtually every way, even if some of those improvements are very slight. Starting with the combat, I thought it was awful in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, not only because none of the hits felt like they actually did anything beyond chipping away at a health bar, but because I never felt like a Spartan and certainly not an assassin. Stealth is an option this time and is more prominent than it was last time, but it's still very weak. Hiding in crowds and waiting in plain sight are returning tactics, but it's always far easier, faster, and more fun to just do it the Viking way and murder your way through. Valhalla's combat is flawed in many ways, but fundamentally it felt much closer to being a Viking than Odyssey did to being a Spartan. The animation is appropriately hard-hitting and brutal, with limbs flying all across the battlefield. The problem is that this animation dominates your actions and frequently takes away control from the player. Often when you beat an enemy, it will trigger a fancy, unskippable death animation. A favourite of mine was where you steal your enemy's axe, and as they bring their arms up to defend themselves, you cleave straight through them and into their shoulder. These are usually very satisfyingly barbaric, but after the 10th one in a row, it just grows tedious. Violent and aggressive, yes, but after seeing it over and over again, it just loses its impact and you get desensitized to it. Many hits do not register correctly, and each movement has a lot of animation priority, meaning that every move has a massive wind-up with little payoff. It is also very easy. If you want any sort of a challenge, crank the difficulty right up, but if you want a power fantasy, you'll carve through Saxons like a lawnmower. Enemies come in a fair few varieties, but never really require any changes to strategy or force you to prioritize one over the other. You acquire new abilities through finding books of knowledge in the open world, and can have up to 8 equipped at any time. The problem is that it takes a while to even find this many, meaning that combat in the opening hours can feel very button mashy. You have a light attack, heavy attack, two-handed attack, dodge, and parry, so it is pretty simple. The two-handed attacks change most between weapons. If you have a shield, you'll hold it up to block, versus if you have a great sword, you'll charge forward. In Valhalla, you get far fewer weapons and armor pieces than you did in Odyssey or even Origins, and your opinion on that will depend on where you stand with Odyssey. Personally, I hated the constant shower of mostly useless weapons in Odyssey, and I don't like loot games in general, so I was glad to see that gone. Each weapon and piece of armor you get this time is unique, with different stats, appearances, and perks. That said, each item wasn't wildly different from each other, but the different types of weapons did help spice things up. You get bearded axes, Dane axes, daggers, great swords, flails, spears, 3 kinds of bows, small shields, and big shields, because there is a difference. Each of these weapon types behaves differently, with bearded axes being quick and light, while Dane axes are heavy and powerful. These differences help spice up combat because if you're bored with one, you can just swap out to another. Dual wielding is also a thing this time round. You can pair an axe with a shield, you can have 2 axes, or even 2 shields if you feel so inclined. There is also a skill upgrade which gives you the ability to dual wield heavy weapons, so you can have 2 great swords, 2 Dane axes, or a spear and a shield, whatever whatever you want. That leads nicely into progression, which is in the form of a skill tree. At first glance, the skill tree is very vast and exciting with loads of nodes to upgrade, but in reality, very few of those skills are actually skills that are usable. Most of them are minor stat increases to health or damage that you won't notice in combat. The skill tree grows as you unlock new paths, but you can't see what skills could be next, meaning that you'll end up wasting points on useless stuff. This is mitigated somewhat by the ability to reset all skill points at any time, but it's a pain in the arse and it would just be easier if you could see what you wanted and work towards that without wasting points. Story-wise, the game is a marked step up from Odyssey, but here is where we also come to the game's greatest flaw, its length. You assume control of Eivor, a male or female Viking who leaves the inhospitable landscape of Norway to forge your own path in the vast map of England, which is rendered beautifully most of the time. I chose male Eivor mainly because his voice actor is significantly better and makes him seem like an actual character with goals and aspirations. Along with your brother and best friend Sigurd, you unite the various disparate regions of England against your common enemy, King Alfred of Wessex. I really enjoyed Eivor as a protagonist, and he was way more interesting than Alexios, though after playing Odyssey I am now aware that Cassandra is considered to be the better choice. Most of the characters are pretty well realised and voiced, but Eivor specifically is definitely one of the more compelling protagonists in Assassin's Creed's long history. He's no Ezio by any means, but he's definitely the best I've played for a while. Eivor is as smart and diplomatic as he is powerful, fiercely loyal but not to a fault. If he thinks something is bullshit, he'll call it out, or at least that's how I played him. As was the case with the last two entries, Valhalla is very much an RPG, and even more so this time. There are many opportunities for you to make choices to shape the narrative, and there are often no correct or black and white answers. Much of the pre-release marketing material would have you believe that King Alfred is the game's villain, but that's barely the case. You meet him a handful of times, and most of your time is spent bouncing around the huge map, speaking to different characters about their various socio-political struggles. The story itself is really all about the friends you made along the way, friends whose names you probably won't even remember as there are so many of them and you last saw them 10 hours ago on the other side of the country. In my last video I said the game was arguably too long, and today I would like to argue that it is too long. When I made that statement I was only about halfway through my playthrough and was quite confident that I liked the game, but I was aware of its flaws. Now those flaws have been greatly compounded as the quality of what I was playing didn't increase and grew more repetitive, but the flaws remained and some even got worse. The game would benefit from some serious fat trimming to streamline everything instead of being faced with constant bugs and repetition. My grievances with bugs and performance issues would still be there, but their impact would be lessened because I wouldn't have had to put up with them for so damn long. I lost count of the amount of crashes my original PS4 faced, but it definitely reached about a dozen. Much like with Ubisoft's previous title, Watch Dogs Legion, constant bugs big and small plagued the experience. Objects clipped through walls that killed my sense of Viking fantasy immersion, enemy AI was so poor or they were so blind that I could just walk straight past them without being spotted, or on the flip side they could just spot me through walls. Draw distance became an issue when I struggled to perform some of the series' iconic leaps of faith from tall structures, as the game couldn't even render the hay bale beneath me. Audio drops, texture pop-in, frame stuttering, and long load times. For the first half, these things bothered me, but I was still having fun, but by 50, 60, 70 hours with it, it just gets tedious. This game is not as grindy as Odyssey was, but that doesn't mean it's any less repetitive. In Odyssey, you'd come to a brick wall of an overpowered area and you'd have to go away and grind some levels in order to progress. Here, you're always at the right level or even over-leveled for every challenge the story throws at you, but there's just so much of it to get through. The quests aren't broken up into main or side quests, instead they are arcs in which Eivor pledges himself to a group to gain their loyalty, many of which end in full-scale sieges. Arcs take place in different locations throughout England, with each featuring multiple quests and important narrative choices. These choices certainly aren't as world-altering as something like The Witcher 3, but they do help shape your experience and do have some impact. Arcs usually involve overthrowing a king to install a new one, or uncovering a conspiracy that points to the Order of the Ancients, the current version of Templars from the old games. These are all fairly interesting setups, and each one is reasonably unique, but you have to do this whole song and dance many times over and over again, with little of the actual main plot woven through. Every so often you'll get to some actual main story stuff, but these moments are fleeting, and before you know it, you have a bunch more areas to pledge to. By the end, you have so many characters it's hard to remember who's who or what you even did for them. In addition to the core story, Eivor's main goal is to establish himself and his clan in England. On top of building alliances through the arcs, you build your settlement known as Ravensthorpe. You will return here regularly to accept new quests, upgrade your gear, or customize various aspects of your experience. experience. This settlement is one of the game's highlights because I felt compelled to go on raids to gain new resources to make it stronger, which also benefits you. If you build a grain reserve or a cattle farm, you'll get a buff when you throw a feast, meaning that there are gameplay incentives to keep you coming back. Upgrading your gear can be done at any time in the inventory menu if you have enough resources, but it can only go so far, at which point you'll need to visit your blacksmith who will improve your gear, raising its upgrade limit and often altering its appearance. Developing your weapons and equipment like this I found much more rewarding than constantly being given junk in a loot system like Odyssey's, but that's just me, and I'm sure many fans of more loot-based games may dislike the limited arsenal. Weapons and armor are very occasionally given after quests, but 99% of them are acquired in the world in treasure chests. These chests are pinged on the map with gold lights, which can also mean wealth or books of knowledge, as I mentioned before. Mysteries are pinged with blue lights, meaning flighting, which is basically Viking rap battle and is awesome, cairns where you can stack rocks, perception puzzles, or challenges, among a few other things. The most interesting of these are world events, which are very similar to stranger missions in Red Dead, where you encounter some weird and wonderful idiot with a bizarre short quest for you. Normally these are over in a matter of minutes, but they're usually quite fun because of all the funky characters. White lights on the map indicate artifacts, which are collectibles like codex pages for the assassins or Roman masks. These lights don't tell you specifically which thing you might find, which adds a much needed sense of organic discovery to things and helps keep the Ubisoft collectathon at bay, or at the very least hidden from view. Exploration feels like a much bigger focus this time, and it's easy to get lost wandering the wilderness and stumbling across unique treasures or missions. I really enjoyed wandering across the stunning countryside of England with a real sense of wonder and discovery. Sailing across England in my longboat and raiding monasteries for resources felt like what a Viking experience should be, and, dare I say it, makes you feel like a Viking. Being from England myself, I do have a little bias towards exploring areas I'm familiar with, like with my home county of Essex, but there was this fantastic fairy tale-like feel to much of the world, that is until I started to grow sick of it all because it outstayed its welcome. But if you do want to get the collectathon back, there is a settlement upgrade which will map out everything for you, or you can just pay real money. Valhalla's microtransactions aren't as bad as Odyssey's, as there are no pay-to-skip grind XP booster options, and it is mostly cosmetic only. Everything that can be customized, from your gear to your boat to your appearance, has been monetized. Most of these are just visual overhauls, but the weapons and armor do come with additional gameplay affecting perks. But then again, I never felt underleveled through the main story, so if you're fool enough to buy this junk, then that's on you. After I'd played to every region and completed the main story, there was one more area to get as part of the endgame, which was vastly higher level than me. Thankfully, I saw in SkillUp's review that he just went for it anyway and had no real trouble. Without that, I probably would have just grinded out those levels and wasted more time. I don't agree with all of his points, and I'm generally much more positive on the game than he is, but fuck me, I'm glad I didn't grind for that shit. To wrap up though, I definitely recommend Assassin's Creed Valhalla to Vikings fans, but this is definitely a wait for sale situation to get rid of all of those bugs, or even just buy on next gen if you're able to. As it stands currently, the game's performance is piss poor, there are far too many bugs, and it crashed my system more than 12 times. The game world itself is a huge, fantastical playground to explore and carve your way through with a bearded axe at your side. It tries to emulate its peers in a number of ways, but doesn't quite match any of them. Valhalla is desperate to be The Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Skyrim all rolled into one, but fails to reach any of those highs. But to be fair, if you're going to steal, you might as well steal from the best. It focuses on choices like The Witcher, it is an immersive historical sim like Red Dead, has Horizon's sense of spectacle and wonder, and Skyrim's sense of exploration and discovery, but also all of Bethesda's bugs. I titled this review a buggy but immersive Viking RPG that outstays its welcome. Buggy and immersive might sound like an oxymoron, but it really is the best way to describe how I feel about it. When it behaves and isn't being more buggy than A Bug's Life, it is an immersive, compelling Viking fantasy romp through the 9th century. It's just a shame that those bugs are so frequent and the game is so long that my tolerance was severely tested. Ultimately, I stand by what I said in my impressions video last week. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is the best Assassin's Creed game in years, even if that's not saying much. So that's it for my Assassin's Creed Valhalla review. If you want to see a few more of my thoughts that I didn't mention here, please check out my impressions video from last week. Hit subscribe, like, and the bell, you know what to do. Go on over to patreon.com/prettygoodgaming to support the content we create. I've been Henry Cooper. That's all for today. Bye for now.